OG Fact Checker, here to give you a juicy tidbit of history that's verified. The more research I do for this YouTube channel, the more interesting people I find. And military veterans play a big role in what we know today as entertainment, be it movies or television. If you haven't done so, you should check out episode 19 of the OG Fact Checker on Desi Arnaz, the man who basically set up the blueprint for television production today. For this episode, I'll introduce you to a man who benefited from Desi Arnaz's blueprint, Clerow Wilson Jr. of Jersey City, New Jersey. Baby boomers and Generation Xers might recognize that name, but beyond those two generations, Clerow Wilson Jr., better known as Flip Wilson, is a stranger to most. He is definitely a first at something, and many comedians who came out during and after the time of Flip Wilson owe him a huge thank you for the money they made entertaining people on television, in films, and in stadiums. Without Flip Wilson breaking barriers in comedy, Redd Foxx, Richard Pryor, George Carlin, Eddie Murphy, Cedric the Entertainer, D.L. Hughley, Martin Lawrence, Chris Rock, Jamie Foxx, Bernie Mac, and more wouldn't be on TV making the money they made had it not been for Flip Wilson. In my opinion, y'all need to stop talking about Pryor and Redd and start giving Wilson, this Air Force veteran, his flowers. And when I tell you his story, you might agree with me. The source I'll be using for this episode is the book Flip, the Inside Story of TV's First Black Superstar by Kevin Cook, published in 2013. This is the best source I could find that would give me a complete picture of Wilson's life. This book truly covers the good, the bad, and the ugly. Wilson had a messy personal life, and I'm using that term glibly. So I'm going to provide a nice balance of the personal and the professional. I'll spill some tea, but I'll keep it focused on what Wilson accomplished. His accomplishments hinged on a DEI type of comedy philosophy that successfully put him in the living rooms of all Americans, Black and white, which is why the title of this episode is Funny Has No Color. Clerow Wilson Jr. was the 10th of 12 children born in December 1932 in Jersey City, New Jersey, right across the river from New York City. The man he knew as his father, Clerow Wilson Sr., was a janitor and handyman, and his mother, well, I got the feeling she was a stay-at-home type mother. Notice I said the man Wilson Jr. knew as his father. I'll get to that in a minute. The family lived in a 4-room apartment in the poorer section of Jersey City and basically ran wild throughout the neighborhood. The Wilson kids had a reputation. When Wilson was 7 years old, he had a crush on a pretty little girl up the street named Geraldine. She wanted nothing to do with him because she said he was a ragamuffin. But if he got her fake nails from Woolworth's, she might like him. So he stole them, but he got the wrong size, and when he tried to return them, he got caught. After that, Geraldine wanted nothing more to do with him because he was now a criminal. One day, Wilson Sr. and Jr. came home to an empty apartment with his brothers and sisters huddled in the living room. Their mother had left the family, taking their youngest child with her. She took the furniture and all the money in the couple's bank account by producing a fake death certificate in her husband's name. With no money, the family was evicted, and Wilson Sr., in an effort to keep the family together, would move the family to various empty cellars and basements, eating scraps from dumpsters until the family was scattered to the wind, split between family members, foster care, and reform schools. Wilson Jr. wound up with an older sister and her husband, and both pretty much physically and emotionally abused 8-year-old Wilson. This same sister revealed a family secret rather offhandedly. Wilson's father would joke all the time how his namesake was darker than him, that he was left in the toaster too long. This is the colorism that still goes on today, where if you're darker than a paper bag, you have no value. Well, there was a reason why Wilson Jr. was darker than Wilson Sr. They weren't related. According to his sister, Wilson was the result of his mother hooking up with a dark-skinned man named Leroy Taylor. It's not clear whether Wilson Sr. knew he had been cheated on, but if he did, it didn't stop him from treating Wilson Jr. as his flesh and blood. Wilson cycled through a series of foster homes where he faced starvation, physical abuse that left scars on his body, and neglect. One of these homes belonged to a shiesty preacher who served as the prototype for his Reverend Leroy of the Church of What's Happening Now character. By the time Wilson reached his teens, he had bounced back and forth between reform school and more foster homes to eventually reunite with his father. But after witnessing a violent scene between his father and uncle, Wilson made the decision to leave Jersey City for good. His chance came in 1950 when he was 16 years old. Wilson and his nephew, who was a year older than him, decided to visit an Air Force recruitment office. With the Korean War looming in the distance, the military needed bodies. Back then, you could join the military at 17 with parental consent. Though his nephew was able to get consent from his mother, Wilson's sister, Wilson had to lie about his age and promise his sister he would send money to her if she gave her fake parental consent, which she did. Wilson was soon introduced to racism in the military. Once he successfully graduated boot camp, Airman Wilson was stationed at Hamilton Air Force Base in San Rafael, California, where he was greeted with the N-word and told that if he stepped out of line once, he'd wind up in the guardhouse. After some coaching, Wilson became an excellent clerk typist, and he quickly advanced to corporal. He was transferred to headquarters, where this 16-year-old practically ran the base as he fielded communications from the Pentagon and made important decisions, such as who should go to the flight school or receive a hardship discharge. But one little mistake concerning his laundry got him thrown into the guardhouse and busted down to airmen. After that, Wilson decided not to make the Air Force a career, and he wanted off the base. He pestered his supervisor for a transfer, who didn't want to let him go, but Wilson got his way, and he was transferred to Anderson Air Force Base in Guam. Wilson's amiable and gregarious personality won over people in his new command, and his sense of humor was welcomed by his supervisor, Captain Spiker, who insisted Wilson call him Hank when it was just the two of them. By Wilson's account, he wasn't a follower of others. He passed the time by reading books instead of chasing women or watching local wild dogs have sex, a pastime on base. But he had other vices, like drinking cheap wine and smoking cannabis. It's also where the teenage Wilson was first introduced to narcotics. Hank, Wilson's supervisor, recognized Wilson had talent and offered him a promotion. Leery of how quickly he was demoted the last time, Wilson refused. His objective was clear. He wanted to serve his time and get out of the military. But Hank wanted to tap into Wilson's talent somehow, and that chance came when a unique problem presented itself: the absence of personnel from mandatory venereal disease films shown during troop presentation meetings. Wilson, a voracious reader, told Hank he could increase attendance using a very unusual method: giving a lecture on sex and the coconut crab, which was a local species in Guam he had studied after watching the local wild dog sex. Wilson posted flyers around the base that said, "Lecture, Sex and the Coconut Crab," yielding the highest attendance ever 400 men. He started off his lecture by scratching his crotch and saying, "Some of you men know a lot about crabs. You may even have given your girl some inside information." From there, Wilson delivered a lecture that got him cheers, pats on the back, and free drinks. His lecture was so successful that Hank arranged for him to deliver it to the Navy and Army bases that were also on the island. With each lecture, he would change it up a bit, including adding a bit of Shakespeare's Julius Caesar while wearing a toga for one particular lecture. Someone in the crowd yelled, "He flippeth his lid." And that's how Clerow Wilson became Flip Wilson. True to his word, Wilson got out of the Air Force in 1954 and settled in San Francisco, where he bellhopped and worked in the office of the Manor Hotel as a typist. But the taste of the adoration he received entertaining in the military gives him the clarity he needed. He wants to be a comedian. He took his first shot at this one night with a totally unprepared act and a stomach full of cheap wine during a 5-minute intermission of the house band after begging the hotel owner. Each night, he refined his act to eventually go on the road, playing all over California, then West Las Vegas, before touring the Chitlin circuit in the South, where he makes slightly more money. But it's a tough life on the road in the Jim Crow era. He played one gig for cents instead of dollars, slept in colored waiting rooms at bus stations. He sometimes had to take payment in food. He peddled his act until he had enough money for a bus ticket to travel to another gig. While he was on the Chitlin circuit, he met Gladys Knight and the Pips, starting a lifelong kinship with the closest thing to family he would ever know. By 1956, Elvis Presley had taken over the airwaves, making his television debut on The Ed Sullivan Show, a spectacle of cultural appropriation that pissed Wilson off. Nat King Cole's show, which couldn't get any sponsors on NBC, was canceled in 15 months. Ironically, Elvis's marriage would be saved through cultural appropriation by using a Wilson catchphrase, but more on that later. 3 years have passed, and Wilson is still struggling. His material needed a refresh, so he began studying the science of humor through a book, Enjoyment of Laughter by Max Eastman, and breaking down the comic timing of Bob Hope, Milton Berle, Jerry Lewis, and George Burns. One particular sentence from Eastman's book caught Wilson's attention. When we are in fun, a particular shift of values takes place. What that means is strangers wouldn't dare talk to each other about sex, drugs, or race. But in a room full of people expecting a joke, you can talk about those things. This simple comment shaped Wilson's routine for the rest of his career. He then began to contemplate how Black he should be. Where's the line that he shouldn't cross if he wants success? He decided to give himself 15 years to find this out. If he didn't reach success by 1973, he quit. Wilson is a man possessed at this point. He traveled everywhere, even to the Midwest, perfecting his routine. During a bus stop in a small Midwestern town, Wilson watched a young soldier step off the bus to be greeted by his sister and mother. The voice of the sister caught his attention. Neither a squeal nor a trill, it was happier and prouder than just about any voice he'd ever heard. Bossier, too. Wilson would use this voice in an act in which Queen Isabella Johnson is getting sweet-talked out of money by Chris Columbus for an overseas expedition. Queen Isabella Johnson would sound a lot like another one of Wilson's stage characters, but more on that later. Wilson migrated to segregated Miami, where he grew a following at a nightclub. One night, he was approached by a man named Herbie Schul, who pronounced to everyone that Wilson will make it big one day. The two form a friendship, and one day Herbie asked Wilson, What can I do for you? And Wilson was like, I need a place to sleep, man. Herbie said, what if I gave you $50 a week instead? Wilson was like, what's the catch? And Herbie said, all you have to do is get better, get famous, make me look like a genius. Maybe someday you pay me back. What do you say? Wilson said, hell yeah. He used Herbie's money to buy a used typewriter and drafted a set of comedy commandments on hundreds of pages he would revise throughout his career, which he titled Flip's Laws. One of those laws was make them remember Flip Wilson as a self-confident man of the world projecting a I don't care if you laugh attitude. Another law was funny has no color. Herbie Schul's checks stopped coming through because Wilson was goofing off in the Virgin Islands. So Wilson hit the road again and made his way to Harlem, New York, and the famous Apollo Theater, where he performed weekly. By this time, he's perfected the Queen Isabella Johnson routine and his Reverend Leroy characters, whose wife bought a dress because the devil made her do it. He studied Jackie Moms Mabley and another famous comic known for his Triple X comedy albums, Redd Foxx, who is about 11 or 12 years older than him. Wilson tried his best to get Fox's attention like an eager puppy. Do you remember me? Do you remember me? Do you remember me? But he's mostly ignored. But Foxx paid Wilson a compliment that he'll repeat in a more sanitized version that launches Wilson's career. You're funny as It's 1963, and Wilson has competition from Bill Cosby and Dick Gregory. Cosby is a regular guest on Johnny Carson's Tonight Show and has put out comedy albums. Gregory put out several albums and a book. But Wilson is still playing clubs along the East Coast and the South. Although he had a successful temporary run in a club in Greenwich Village that launched legends like Cosby, Gregory, Lenny Bruce, and Woody Allen, no one is knocking at his door. By 1965, Cosby is playing sidekick to Robert Culp on TV's I Spy, and both Foxx and Wilson are jealous, but more so Foxx because by this time he's 42 years old and can't get a TV deal to save his life because his act is too damn dirty. The manager of the Apollo, Bobby Schiffman, who has connects in the business, tells him so. Foxx is like, well, I can't do anything about that. And Schiffman says, yeah, you can. Promise you'll deliver a clean act and I'll get you on Carson. Foxx is like, bet. Schiffman does his magic and bing, bang, boom, Foxx is on Carson and he delivers a clean routine. Overnight, Fox's name is in everyone's mouth and he's now a regular on Carson. Okay, I won't get into specifics, but Wilson does Foxx a favor the day before one of his appearances on Carson. When Foxx is sitting on the famous couch and Carson asks him who's the funniest comic out there, without hesitation, Foxx said, Flip Wilson. Finally, Wilson gets the call he's been waiting for, an invite to be on The Tonight Show. The show ran out of time for the first 2 times he showed up to perform. Third luck's the charm for Wilson, and he performed his Queen Isabella Johnson and Chris Columbus sketch. He's a hit with the audience and with Mr. Carson, who invited him back 26 times over the next 2 years. The money is rolling in. No more working for food or sleeping in segregated bus stations. His salary at the Apollo increases, and so did his booking fees. No more Chitlin Circuit. Wilson is now a headliner at clubs who want to see people who've been on TV. In 1966, Wilson is now ready for Las Vegas, this time as an opening act for who would be his lifelong friend, Bobby Darin of Mac the Knife fame. Darren had to throw his weight around to make it happen because Black performers were excluded from mixing with white guests and using hotel facilities. Through Darren, Wilson is now hanging out with Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack. He's even rubbing elbows with Elvis, who tells him during a dressing room visit that Reverend Leroy was right about the devil before getting on his knees in front of Wilson and Darren to say a prayer. In Priscilla Presley's biography, when she found out Elvis had been cheating on her with Anne Margaret, she pitched a fit, naturally. When she calmed down, he said he was sorry, and with puppy dog eyes said, "I guess the devil made me do it." Flip needed a manager, and he hired Monty Kaye, a former jazz player and Diane Carroll's first husband. Kaye's first move was to get Wilson on wax as soon as possible. His second move was to craft Wilson as a brand, hipper and cheaper than Cosby and cleaner than Fox. In summer 1966, two major events put the stars in alignment for Wilson. He and Kaye set a milestone. In 3 years, Wilson will have his own show. And in a guest appearance for a summer replacement show, he met a fellow Air Force vet who served as a disc jockey named George Carlin and a Cosby wannabe who suffered from crippling stage fright named Richard Pryor. The next year, Wilson becomes a regular on Ed Sullivan and Johnny Carson, and he has success with his second comedy album, Cowboys and Colored People. When Kaye told him how much Atlantic Records was paying him, Wilson proposed his own record label. With Kaye's help, he started Little David Records, an Atlantic Records sub-label named after Wilson's first son. The label produced two artists at the beginning, Flip Wilson and George Carlin. Wilson also pays back Herbie Schul, his benefactor from his Miami days, plus interest. As demand for Wilson increased, so did his booking fees. His guest shots expanded to the Carol Burnett Show, Dean Martin Comedy Hour, Merv Griffin Show, Hollywood Squares, The Joey Bishop Show, and Laugh-In, where he and Sammy Davis Jr. make Here Come the Judge and Old Pig Meat Markham line a catchphrase. With all this new money, he's being approached with investment opportunities, and Monty, his manager, wondered how Wilson, a ninth grade dropout, is going to field them all. Kaye admitted he was wrong to underestimate Wilson. Instead of looking through all the opportunities, Wilson told Kaye and the investment advisors to go through all of them, pick the most promising ones, and for every dollar of his money invested, they also had to invest because, in his words, if I go broke, you are going with me. This proved to be a solid investment strategy he would use for over 20 years, netting him $10 million. NBC saw potential in Wilson. They thought he could be a pioneer, and they were pushing for him to have his own show, but they needed assurances. Will middle America like him? Is he too Black for white audiences? Instead of putting him on the fall schedule in 1969, NBC offered Wilson a special to let the Nielsen ratings make the final decision. 6 weeks after the 1969 Apollo moon landing, the Flip Wilson special aired, and the buzz is that this will be a pilot for a new show. He opened with his Reverend Leroy with the Shopaholic Wife sketch and delivered the line that is repeated by practically everyone the next day. The devil made me buy this dress. Wilson also introduced another character to the American audience in an airplane sketch with Jonathan Winters as Maud Frickert. This character's voice sounded like a mix of Queen Isabella Johnson and the soldier's sister at the bus stop, whose voice Wilson liked. When Maud Frickert asked this sassy flight attendant in a miniskirt, high heels, and a flip wig for her name, she said, "Geraldine, Geraldine Jones, honey. That's Jones, honey. Geraldine Jones, curiously named after Wilson's childhood crush, became one of his most successful characters. So successful, it eventually became a burden. Smart and sassy, dressed in a 500 Poochie mini dress and heels with a never seen boyfriend in jail named Killer, Geraldine lets you know right off the bat she wasn't for play because, in her words, you don't know me like that. Geraldine's other catchphrase, what you see is what you get, is now used today as WYSIWYG, which in the 1980s was used to describe software that accurately reflects the appearance of the finished product. This star-studded special also had Andy Williams singing Johnny Cash's A Boy Named Sue and Art Carney from Laugh-In spoofing Midnight Cowboy. This odd mix of blacks and whites worked. Wilson took a 42% share of viewers in that time slot and ranked 8th overall in shows watched that week. The proof was in the numbers. America was ready for Flip Wilson. Those days on the Chitlin circuit made him realize what worked and what to avoid. After all, look how long it took for Redd Foxx to get a seat at the table. He wanted his show to be controversy free, which meant no politics, because it had been the kiss of death for the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, a show that never won its time slot and was canceled. A series of talks with NBC executives between 1969 and 1970 brainstormed on the format. Should it be a sitcom? Wilson rejected that idea. He was first and foremost an MC and storyteller. It should be a variety show. The network gave the green light, and in fall 1970, the Flip Wilson Show got a Thursday night time slot. Wilson's network deal opted for less cash up front in exchange for a producer credit plus residuals if the show went into syndication. The only people before him to get a syndication deal were Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz. For Wilson's debut on September 17, 1970, he danced with Big Bird, flirted with David Frost as Geraldine, and had a difficult James Brown as musical guest. His fruit salad formula worked. The Flip Wilson Show slaughtered the competition, rated the #1 show for the week and the time slot, drawing nearly 40 million viewers. In the weeks that followed, his show consistently beat out Gunsmoke, The Mod Squad, Laugh-In, Marcus Welby, MD, and Bonanza. Nor would Wilson have problems getting sponsors. The show's ad rate went from $44,000 a minute to $53,000 a minute to $65,000 a minute. Unheard of for a show featuring a black man as the star. By 1971, it would be $85,000 a minute, more than the Super Bowl. Wilson ran a tight ship, according to Tim Conway, who occasionally guest starred. His time running an Air Force base as a 16-year-old gave him all the tools he needed to be a producer. He was mindful of every expense, and even though the network gave him a $1 million budget for the show, he did it for half and distributed the difference to his staff. He paid his guest stars more than other variety shows, including Jackie Moms Mabley, who had never been paid as much as Wilson paid her for an appearance. He wanted his show to be hip, cool, smooth, and he needed writers who could deliver, which is why he fired 2 veteran comedy writers and replaced them with one of his old buddies, George Carlin. Wilson also produced Carlin's best-selling comeback comedy album through Little David Records. Richard Pryor was brought on in 1973 as a writer and performer after he had worn out his welcome in Vegas as a loose cannon. Heavily addicted to drugs, he was rude, vulgar, and uncontrollable, and resentful of Wilson's success, calling him NBC's House Negro for his fruit salad approach to the show. According to Cook's biography, in one incident on set, Pryor poked out the eyes of a gay male hairdresser he thought was looking at him too long. NBC banned Pryor off the studio lot, but he was allowed to return after Wilson talked to the network. The network's lawyers paid the hairdresser a settlement and made him sign an NDA. Pryor came back as though nothing had happened. He still called Wilson the house Negro and never thanked him. Pryor's resentment of Wilson was personal, but for a good portion of the Black community, it was about representation. Some had a problem with the fruit salad formula and seeing Wilson, a straight Black man in drag during an era where Black men were victimized through stereotypes and racism. The image of the Black man in America was important and couldn't afford any setbacks. Wilson, however, saw Geraldine as a feminist, and he was staying true to his comedy philosophy: funny has no color. By the second season, Wilson had TV shows All in the Family and The Waltons bringing down heavy on his neck. And his buddy Redd Foxx, who had come on the show briefly as a guest and comedy writer, got his own show, Sanford and Son. The fruit salad formula was beginning to get a little ripe, and the ratings were slipping slightly. Wilson worked harder, creating new material, but the ratings continued to slide in the third season. Pryor was still being difficult, doubling down on Wilson for being a sellout because he's attending golf celebrity tournaments with Bob Hope. Wilson was determined to keep the show alive until the show reached the number of episodes that satisfied the syndication deal. He chugged along in the fourth season, dropping out of the top 20 shows, beaten by All in the Family, The Waltons, and Sanford and Son, which rated third at the close of the season. The writing was on the wall for Wilson. The network threatened to not renew for a fifth season. Beating the network to the punch, Wilson announced that he was quitting, and to fulfill his contract and get the syndication deal, he'll do a few specials. His last show aired on March 7th, 1974, and TV viewers finally got to see Geraldine's newly released boyfriend, Killer, played by, are you ready? O.J. Simpson. After that, Wilson did a couple of specials, attended celebrity fundraising events, headlined in Las Vegas, and basically lived a life of ease financially. His personal life is another matter. If you want to know more, buy the book. He did return to television in a 1983 sitcom, Charlie and Company, co-starring his old friend Gladys Knight and a young Jaleel White, but it was canceled after 18 episodes. In the summer of 1998, Wilson noticed he lost a little weight and thought that's a good thing for a 60-something. But then an ache in his stomach intensified over time. His doctor dismissed it, but when the pain got worse, Wilson saw a specialist who told him he had liver cancer with 3 months to live. He died on Thanksgiving Day, 1998, before his 65th birthday. To sum up this episode, I'll quote Flip Wilson from a Penthouse interview. A show hosted by a Black had never been accepted. So the first time that knob's turned on, people are judging against all they have ever been taught. I may have been the first Black in that home. And when a young kid sees the rapport between the guests on my show, maybe that will ring a little bell. He says, I like that cat. Then somebody tells him, ain't no good. He'll say, now hold it. I like that. This is meaningful, more important than money or anything. So here's to the Air Force veteran who broke barriers in television and comedy. Like it or not, he was the first Black male comedian in television to put on a wig and a dress and get people, Black and white, to love a Black lady with boundaries who didn't take no from nobody. But all joking aside, in a world of Redd Foxxes and Bill Cosbys, he managed to find his own way by focusing on comedic storytelling with race as a side note. I love history, You came for the truth. Thank you for staying for the story.